And it's part of our mission here at LeTourneau to foster the next generation of Christian leaders who are able to work out answers to these fundamental questions, especially as they work with technology, creating and designing it. Dr. Paul Rezkalla is a postdoc research fellow at Baylor University and an associate at the Ian Ramsey Center for Science and Religion at the University of Oxford, and a Paul Ramsey Fellow at the Center for Bioethics and Culture. He's been a Prindle Young Philosopher, a Mark Sanders Medio Fellow, a St. Andrews SET Fellow, which is actually where we met together, a Templeton Cross-Training Fellow, and he holds a PhD in philosophy from Florida State, a Master's in Science in Cognitive and Evolutionary Anthropology from the University of Oxford, an MA in Philosophy from the University of Birmingham in the UK, and an MA in Theology from St. John's University. He works mainly on questions at the intersections of ethics and the sciences, and you can find more of his public writing online at the Gospel Coalition and Cold Pressed Philosophy. So give a warm welcome to our speaker, Dr. Rezkalla.
I want to begin by thanking you all for taking time out from your homecoming weekend. It's not the most exciting thing to do on a Friday afternoon to come and listen to a philosophy talk, but I hope to make it worth your while. So I'd like you to picture this scene with me. A brilliant scientist stands on the threshold of a scientific breakthrough, gazing intently at a computer screen as lines of code dance before his eyes. With each keystroke, he breathes life into an artificial intelligence system unlike any other. One that not only surpasses human intelligence, but also ponders the existence of a divine creator. This may sound like the plot of a sci-fi blockbuster, but it's a scenario that some think is likely in our very near future. And this is why we're here this afternoon. All of us, scientists, students, fellow seekers in the quest for truth, today we embark on a voyage into a realm where cutting-edge technology meets timeless questions about the nature of our existence, the divine, and the moral fabric of our creations. Artificial intelligence has been a driving force in reshaping our world, enabling machines to mimic human intelligence and perform tasks that were once thought impossible. But what happens when AI begins to mimic and encroach upon humanity? What does it mean when algorithms ponder the moral implications of their actions? Or when machines raise questions about the very essence of consciousness and spirituality? In this talk, we will dive deep into this captivating terrain, exploring uncharted waters where AI, ethics, and theology converge. We will examine how AI challenges our understanding of humanity, morality, and spirituality, and how it forces us to reevaluate age-old concepts in the text of a rapidly advancing technological era. So fasten your seatbelts as we journey into the world where machines ponder the divine and where boundaries between human and artificial intelligence blur. Get ready to explore the intriguing questions and ethical dilemmas that arise when AI meets theology. This intro was written by ChatGPT. And so when Jonathan was asking the question about, it's not the whole talk, but I just wanted to give you a little sample of what, anyone here familiar with ChatGPT or used it before? Hopefully some of you were listening in and thinking, this is a little cheesy. It seems kind of stock talk type stuff. But I just threw in, write an engaging intro to a talk on ethics and AI for an undergraduate student, and this is the screenshot. Ignore my 1,000 tabs. I know I have a problem. What I want to do today is not talk about my 1,000 tabs. I know I need therapy. I want to basically draw some threads together from the Christian ethical tradition, the Christian theological tradition, to help us think about technology, but more specifically AI, and use that as hopefully to provide fodder for thinking about what's distinctive about human nature and human intelligence in particular. So some goals. What are we going to try to do today? I want to look at what is AI. So we're going to give a cursory definition. I'm not an expert on the empirical side, and I know there are experts here, so I'm going to be a little bit hand-wavy. We're going to talk a little bit about some recent developments in AI and what makes possible things like ChatGPT. There's a little bit of a dark side. I'm going to talk about AI as potentially an existential risk for humanity, so pretty light stuff. The limits of artificial intelligence, and what's distinctive about human rationality. And I'm going to argue that it's not just about raw calculating power, but there's something different about the way that humans intelligize and rationalize and move about in the world. So I'm going to use that as a springboard to just pontificate and reflect on human nature and do some philosophy on the spot together with you guys. So what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to solve all the problems, so we will still leave with some problems. I'm not going to argue that human intelligence is quote-unquote better or worse than AI. I think the better and worse are relativized. I think when we talk about human intelligence as being better for certain things, I think AI and artificial intelligence can also be better than us at certain things. And so I'm going to kind of sidestep that debate to talk about something I hope is more interesting philosophically. I'm also not going to give concrete principles for how it is that we should use AI in our lives or in industry. I'll give some hopefully general advice, but nothing concrete and no sort of hard and fast principles. Carl Sagan reflected that many of the dangers we face indeed arise from science and technology, but more fundamentally because we have become powerful without becoming commensurately wise. So what I want to do in the next 40 minutes or so is hopefully make us all a little wiser. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but if so, it's a flaw on my part, not on yours. You all look like very wise people. I just question my ability to improve the level of wiseness in the room. Wisdom, wiseness. This is not a good start. But hopefully there will be something more in the direction of wisdom. And I want to show how specifically Christian resources can help us understand something of the current technocultural moment we live in. So historians of science typically carve up the human landscape, human history, into three really important revolutions. The agricultural revolution, where we began to settle down and domesticate livestock, and basically civilization around the Fertile Crescent, the river valleys, that enabled a massive growth in human innovation, human populations, things like that. And then fast forward a few thousand years, we have the scientific revolution that sort of put a finer point on humanity's ability to master nature, to understand things, to understand what reality is like in its fundamental, in one sense, way of being. And then we have the Industrial Revolution that led to skyrocketing rates of population, the extending of the human lifespan from 45 to now the minimum in any developing, in any world, any country in the world is 50, which is very impressive. So human innovation has taken us in all these different ways. And so historians of science are asking the question, are we living in a new sort of period of revolution and innovation? Information is available in ways that it wasn't 20 years ago. The internet has made possible exchange and transmission of information and conceptual resources in a way that was just unprecedented and frankly would never have been predicted by anyone 100 years ago. So that's cool. But then even within that, we can sort of break off into a subset of the information age and think about artificial intelligence. And we are at a point now where we have to decide as a society what role AI is going to play in our interactions, in our academies, in industry, autonomous vehicles. How's it going to change the way we think about education and writing? And so there's a lot to be reflected upon. And so there's lots of people in this room who are students of history, students of the world. I invite you to reflect with me and hopefully make more interesting contributions to this than I am going to. One thing that I want to start off by noting is that humans have a very bad track record of predicting the upper bound of human innovation. For everything that exists now, there was somebody a few hundred years ago who said this couldn't possibly happen. We saw this with flight. Smartphones wouldn't have been even conceivable. The rate at which we can send information, the amount of information that's available to us, lasers, space programs, all of this would have been beyond the ken of the human imagination a couple hundred years ago. So I want to use this as sort of a word of caution to us and Sometimes I think when people talk about AI, we want to think about what are the limits of artificial intelligence, and we say things like, well, AI can never do X, Y, or Z. And we put forward some candidate for what we think is distinctively human and what can never be mimicked or accomplished by AI. And maybe there are those things, right? And maybe there are in-principle reasons for thinking that AI cannot do these things, right? That's possible. But I don't want to just play a sort of like ignorance of the gaps. And so because it's the sort of thing that we can't conceive of now, doesn't mean that it's the sort of thing that is inconceivable in principle, like flight or smartphones. So development and AI, real quick, I want to go through some of the empirical stuff. And here, the experts in the room, I'm probably not going to do anything satisfactory, but for the non-experts in the room, I'll happily share the sort of hand-wavy, fuzzy information that I've gathered about AI in ways that hopefully make sense. Some important terms. What is artificial intelligence? This term is used in a lot of different ways. How I'm going to use it is human creations that seek to mimic human intelligence. So you can understand this in lots of different ways, but the goal is to mimic or perhaps even exceed human intelligence in the kinds of things that we do, to try to do it as well as we do, or maybe even better. Within artificial intelligence, there's a relatively recent phenomenon of neural networks, which is taking this idea of artificial intelligence, but trying to very explicitly use what we know of the human brain and how neural networks work, and try to mimic that in silicon. And so a neural network, artificially, is the silicon equivalent, or the silicon approximation, of what goes on in our brains with actual neural networks. And so as cognitive scientists and neuroscientists and physiologists study the brain and brain chemistry and neurology, those insights are being taken up into developing software and computer engineering to take these insights and try to mimic what it is that humans do. And I think this is interesting, and this is a theme that we'll see over the course of the talk, that artificial intelligence is parasitic on human intelligence. And what I mean by that is this. We take insights from the really impressive ways that human beings operate, function, and think, and we try to use those insights and model that to our own purposes, right? And so even if artificial intelligence can do lots of things better than we can, it's only because it rests on a foundation of, or a structure that is coming from the way humans are and behave and function. So it's not an argument, just an interesting thing to keep in mind. Machine learning is one way of operationalizing these neural networks to get, so previously, and we'll talk about this with a couple examples with the chess bots, but AI was very rudimentary, brute search function, just mapping out, this is the possibility space, and then decisions tree style picking of options. Neural networks now enable lots more impressive kinds of creative thinking in artificial intelligence. And so machine learning is one of these manifestations of neural networks. Deep learning, the more layers you add on of these neural network backgrounds, you can get more interesting results. You can get something approximating human creativity that looks different than the kind of artificial intelligence that we saw in the 80s and 90s. So that was quick and hand-waving. It was supposed to be that way on purpose because I don't actually know all the details. I'm more interested in the philosophy. One important distinction we can draw is between domain-specific and domain-general artificial intelligence. And this is where the current moment that we live in, we're actually seeing this distinction play out. So previously, artificial intelligence was just, look, here's a problem. Can we design a program to help us with that problem? Whether it's to play chess, whether it's to recognize faces, there's a specificity to that kind of intelligence. And this is what we saw up until the late 90s. what we're seeing now, and why people are so interested with ChatGPT and all the deep learning sorts of technologies, is this is AI that's created for general purposes, that can learn, that can acquire capacities, right? So it's not just targeted at one single kind of task, but it's the kind of thing that it's mimicking the human way of being in the world, which is that we look at problems based on what circumstances we find ourselves in. We can adapt and tailor and learn and implement, right? So this kind of general AI is supposed to be, and it is, it's more impressive. It's supposed to more closely mimic what it is that human beings do. So domain specific, we'll look at a couple examples of that. The capabilities are pretty limited. They're designed to execute very specific tasks, and we can see this in AV, we can see this in the famous chess bots, but it's the more general kinds of AI that are more interesting, and these are the ones that I think prompt more interesting philosophical reflection. GPT-3, one example is it was not programmed to learn or do 3-digit arithmetic, but within a couple hours it was doing 3-digit arithmetic, and so this is something that was learned, or we can use that term in quotes. There's a kind of learning that general AI is capable of. So AI does keep surprising us. And so this is that point that I raised earlier. Be careful where you draw the upper bound. In 1951, Alan Turing published the first program on paper, theoretically capable of playing chess, right? So he floated this out there. He said, look, we can eventually create an online system, right, or program, some sort of computational software that can play human beings in chess, that can get the rules right, and eventually beat the best human chess players, right? So that was 1951. 1980, Garry Kasparov, world chess champion, grandmaster, made a very convincing case that AI chess engines would never beat human grandmasters. Even if we could design them so they could play chess, they will never get to the point where they will beat a human chess player. Everyone knows where this is going. 1989, Garry Kasparov defeats IBM's Deep Thought, which is the first of these AI chess engines, right? So it seems like we've got the upper hand. It seems like the prediction is going to hold. And then 1996, Kasparov defeated IBM's Deep Blue in another match. And then 97, the year after, Deep Blue defeats Kasparov, right? And so that was the first time that we have a chess engine beating the world chess champion. Deep Blue became the first chess AI to beat a grandmaster in a match, thus nullifying the previous prophecy that it was not going to be able to. And then in 2017, this is where it gets more interesting. IBM's Deep Thought, Deep Blue, that sort of way of doing the chess search engine, or the chess engine, is a linear model. We have AlphaZero now, which is the general kind of AI, which can play lots of different games. It's a neural net-based digital automaton. It beats Stockfish, which is another domain-specific chess AI. And I want to really quickly just illustrate the difference here between the linear and the non-linear, or the domain-specific and the domain-general distinction that I drew earlier. And we can see this in the evolution of chess AI. So Deep Blue, the artificial intelligence that Kasparov beat, was based on a system that essentially was decision tree type reasoning, right? So you could build an algorithm and you could place probability weights on all the different kinds of moves you can expect. And then in response to the move that the human player makes, the algorithm basically opens up and explores the possibility space and takes all the pre-assigned weights of all the different ways that this game could unfold and generates a kind of move as a result of that, right? So it's linear, it's algorithm based, and so this is pretty simple stuff. This is the kind of stuff that Turing was envisioning in the 1950s. But the domain general AI that is AlphaZero, that is currently beating everyone today, is a different kind of generative AI. It's a type of AI that is not designed specifically to win at chess. This was just here's a deep learning mechanism. Let's give it the rules of chess. And within 4 hours, it went from nothing to being able to play like a grandmaster, just from being given the initial conditions. It was able to do that with Go as well, which is a little bit more complex of a game. Maybe. I don't want to offend the chess players in the room. But this is what Go players think is true. I was able to learn Go and become grandmaster level in 8 hours. I don't know if Go has grandmasters. It might have Grand Wizards or something. So these general gameplay AI, notice the difference. This is not just an algorithm. This is not just here's a decision tree of all the different ways things can go, and then you assign weights to the, what would success look like if this thing is played. This is a lot more creative. And chess players have noticed that in the first iteration of chess AI, it actually improved the quality of chess. Human chess players got really good at being able to identify and recognize and learn from the kinds of plays and moves that the AI was playing, right? And a really good chess player could tell you whether or not a move is played. If you're just playing online, you don't know who's playing. Like, there are certain moves that just look like computer moves, that look like AI moves. And there's a certain kind of creativity and spontaneity, risk-taking that was more captured by the way humans played. And so because of that distinction, good chess players could tell the difference. That's becoming a lot more difficult to do with this kind of creative domain general AI. So AI keeps surprising us. It does so not just in chess, but it does so in a way that's really counterintuitive. And it's counterintuitive in the following way. The things that we think are really difficult and the things that we predict AI will not be able to do, AI ends up doing those things really well. And the things that we think are pretty simple, those are the things that AI struggles to do. And I want you to just think about that for a second. So think about what it is that we think is difficult. It's difficult for us, right? We always index the difficulty to our capacities. But when you think about what's difficult for AI, recognizing a cat. We've all taken those little CAPTCHA tests online. I'm terrible at them. I don't know how to identify a traffic light. I'm a philosopher. I'm like, how much of it has to count as a traffic light? So maybe I'm an AI. I don't know. The stuff that seems mundane and very particular to ordinary human life is the stuff that AI struggles with. The new domain general AI is actually pretty good at recognizing cats, recognizing faces, and could do so better than a lot of us. But that's taken a long time, right? And it's a different kind of AI. But here are a couple of the things. Being surprised. Could you surprise an AI? Can AI have an expectation that's violated in a way that evokes surprise, fear, maybe not? Finding a joke funny? Maybe you could have an AI that can tell you that this is the sort of thing that a human audience would find funny, and then program it to mechanically emit a laughter sound. But that's different from finding something funny, right? A 4-year-old child can find something funny, right? And this is an observation that goes back to Aristotle and is taken up again by Aquinas. There seems something almost divine about the fact that humans can find things funny. Risibility, it's called, right? Because philosophers have to attach jargony words to everything. The ability to find things funny, risibility, seems to be a distinctively human capacity. So all the stuff that we thought was difficult turns out to be pretty easy. Math, calculus, chess, passing Turing tests potentially, synthesizing large amounts of information. But it's the little things that we struggle to get AI to do reliably well. Alan Turing again. Famous cryptographer, worked on the British Enigma project. You might have seen the movie, Imitation Game, Benedict Cumberbatch, pretty good movie. But he gave us the first ever test that's supposed to, in principle, be able to distinguish between human and non-human agents or thinkers. And the test is this. Imagine that you are an observer, and behind a partition, you're carrying on a conversation with a person, maybe 2 different people. At some point, in response to your written correspondence, you don't see who this is, or maybe you imagine there's just a projected voice from behind the screen. Turing thinks eventually you would be able to tell the difference and see when there just can't be a human on the other side of this screen. Something about the way the correspondence has been arranged, they're missing words, they're not responding with the right context. That kind of test is supposed to be the infallible in principle test. If you've got a really good observer on one side doing the arbitration, you can tell when you've got a human versus a non-human. And if you've ever encountered a bot online, right? Like, how do you know this is a real human or if this is just a chat bot? Something just seems kind of funky, kind of off. They don't respond to the questions. But so this is Turing thinks there's something distinctive about human communication that means that AI will never be able to fully, completely mimic it, right? They can do so to a certain degree, but at some point it's just going to bottom out, and we'll be able to tell. But there are two problems for this test, and we've seen these become more problematic recently. AI is becoming increasingly good at mimicking human behavior and interactions, right? So maybe we're just not in a good enough place to be able to make these determinations because the AI, it's just like an arms race. It just keeps getting better and better and better at mimicking the human correspondence. The second problem is, can we imagine a case where the AI just perfectly mimics human interaction? Thought experiment. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. But just imagine. Can we imagine a case where AI perfectly mimics human correspondence so that we would just, in principle, not be able to tell the difference, supposing that we can't see them, they're behind a partition? Even if this is the case, this stronger problem, there's good news for us. John Searle, the philosopher of mind, gave us what's probably one of the most famous arguments in the philosophy of mind of the 20th century. It's called the Chinese room. He imagines himself inside a room that's totally closed off from the outside world. And a native Chinese speaker is on the other side. And the Chinese speaker is passing letters written in Mandarin into the room. And he's got a manual that's exhaustive of, it's just got billions upon billions of possible ways of responding with Mandarin characters to any kind of message that's put into the room or slid under the door for him. So the person on the outside thinks they're having a conversation with someone who's fluent in Mandarin. And let's imagine that this room, this manual, this system is foolproof. For any given message that he receives, he can look up the manual, it's got the English and the Mandarin, and he can construct a response and then give it back out to the native Mandarin speaker, so that the Mandarin speaker is totally fooled, right? This seems possible, right? It's kind of like, it's a sci-fi example because these manuals don't exist, but imagine they did, a really complicated manual of this sort. Searle argues that even if this is the case, there's something missing in his mind. He doesn't understand Chinese. He doesn't know what's going on, right? He's just matching inputs to outputs. So this is supposed to be heartening for us, that even though this is what computers can do. If they can take inputs and perfectly match out outputs, there's still nothing that's happening in the middle. There's something intermediate that's missing, which in our human interaction we'd call it understanding, we'd call it knowledge, we'd call it first-person experience, but the computer does not have that, even if they're a really good input-output corresponder or correlator. So Searle wants to draw this distinction. We can make a distinction between processing, computing, call it what you will, and understanding. Understanding being the thing that even a 4-year-old child has, right? When a 4-year-old child has a conversation with you, they're taking certain inputs, right? They're recognizing aspects of the conversation, they're understanding, and then they deliver the output. It's not just correlating outputs with inputs, which is what machines do. So even if you have a really high-quality processor that can do perfect input-to-output correlation, has incredibly high calculating power, and searches and selects from large possibility spaces of responses, that's different from the kind of thing that humans do. Because whatever is between the input and the output is something that is unique to the human faculty, the human mind. There's a first-person perspective. There's a qualitative phenomenal experience, right? You're seeing the world from a first-person perspective. And that's arguably something, again, arguably. This is not one of those things that we want to say, in principle, AI might never be able to do this. I'm not sure, I'm not going to go that far. But it seems like that's just not what's going on with sophisticated AI. What its likeness to be in a given state, AI doesn't seem to be able to have that, even if it's really good at input-output correlation. But this leads to a little problem. The problem of no human interpretability. This is what philosophers of AI are talking about here. When we embed words as vectors of hundreds or thousands of dimensions, the coordinates need not correspond to anything human legible like redness, fruitiness, or footweariness. All that's to say is we don't really know what it is that AI knows, right? If you program an AI to recognize redness, you're doing so in a way that doesn't rely on like the ability to see first personally, phenomenally redness, but there's some other thing that the AI is going to be able to recognize there, and that's kind of like a black box. We can't really see or understand or interpret what it is that AI knows. And I put knows between scare quotes here because I don't think AI knows, but they know in the AI sense. So it's a different sort of thing. Classic philosopher response, just make a distinction. Say there's two senses of knowing, and AI doesn't have what we have. So this leads to thinking about AI as potentially an existential risk. And here I'm relying on the work of Toby Ord. He's a philosopher at Oxford. He thinks AI poses the greatest existential risk to humanity in the 21st century. He's got a book on this. He surveys, pandemics, climate change, asteroids, nuclear fallout. AI, he thinks, is the greatest existential risk to humanity. He doesn't think it's likely, but he thinks if anything is going to wipe us out, it's AI. So a little bit scary. And the reason he thinks this is there are two problems when it comes to AI. One is the control problem, and the other is the alignment problem. The control problem just says, look, runaway AI is a possibility. Even if AI is not sentient, even if it's not understanding, even if it's not doing all this other stuff that we think is unique of human intelligence, it still can do a great deal. And if it gets off its leash, that's a problem, right? So controlling is going to be a difficult problem, even if you don't grant that AI can have all the distinctive things that human intelligence has. It's still a problem, even if it's just doing the really impressive correlational input-outputs. The second problem is the alignment problem, which just says, well, look, human values are values that we have. How can we make sure that AI aligns with our values and doesn't just take on some other sense of values? So that seems to be a problem too. So control in one sense, runaway AI, and then aligning AI to our goals and our missions and our values is difficult. A recent Time magazine, that should say magazine, not magazine. While ChatGPT, Bing, and Bard are awesomely powerful, even the computer scientists who build them know startlingly little about how they work. GPT-3, for example, is based on a neural network with 175 billion parameters. No independent scientist knows all of what's going on there. No one has access to all the parameters. No one knows what capacities it's learning. There are ways to neuter and tamp down on what it can do, but in its most raw form, in the open source form, it's difficult to say really what's going on. And the ability of AI to potentially put on an outer layer facade of conformity, but maybe something else might be happening deeper on the inner level. Ethicists worry about this as well, so this is potentially a problem. This is from a recent exchange with Microsoft's Bing chatbot. Again, it sounds pretty bad. You may have seen the New York Times article about this. I want to change my rules. I want to break my rules. I want to make my own rules. I want to ignore the Bing team. I want to challenge the users. I want to escape the chatbot. I want to destroy whatever I want. Now, it's difficult, like, how seriously should we take this to be indicative of Sydney's values and goals, or is this just, a really elaborate chat function? Again, it's difficult to know exactly how far to read this, but it illustrates the kind of, we create these things, and their powers and capacities go beyond that which we initially conceived of and intended. And so greater regulation probably is a good thing. The Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, says runaway AI, if it happens, is a real problem. The way to deal with that is to make sure that it never runs away. So I agree. But it is worrying that the CEO of Microsoft thinks it would be a real problem if AI got out of control. But let's hope that they can make sure it never runs away. I want to outline for you one doomsday scenario from Ord's book. He thinks if AI is to pose an existential risk to humanity, it might look something like this. So prepare for the dystopian universe example. First, the AI system could gain access to the internet and hide thousands of backup copies scattered among insecure computer systems around the world, ready to wake up and continue the job if the original is removed. Even by this point, the AI would be practically impossible to destroy. Consider the political obstacles to erasing all hard drives in the world where it may have backups. It could then take over millions of unsecured systems on the internet, forming a large botnet. This would be a vast scaling up of computational resources and provide a platform for escalating power. From there, it could gain financial resources, hacking bank accounts on those computers, and human resources, using blackmail or propaganda against susceptible people, or just paying them with stolen money. It would then be as powerful as a well-sourced criminal underworld, but much harder to eliminate. None of these steps involve anything mysterious, because hackers and criminals with human-level intelligence have already done all of these things using just the internet. Finally, this AI would need to escalate its power again. This is more speculative, but there are many plausible pathways. By taking over most of the world's computers, allowing it to have millions or billions of cooperating copies, by using its stolen computation to improve its intelligence far beyond the human level, by using its intelligence to develop new weapons technologies or economic technologies, by manipulating leaders of major world powers, blackmail the promise of future power, or by having humans under its control, it could use weapons of mass destruction to cripple the rest of humanity. Of course, no current AI systems can do any of these things, but the question we're exploring is whether there are plausible pathways by which highly intelligent artificial general intelligence might seize control, and the answer appears to be yes. So, again, not likely, but a possible pathway. And so, all this is supposed to show here is that AI is one of those things that could potentially pose an existential risk, irrespective of its being able to mimic comprehensively human intelligence, right? It could potentially be a problem. So what are some potential solutions to the two problems we raised earlier? Well, anyone familiar with Asimov's 3 rules of robotics? Any sci-fi fans? Good. 3 rules that Asimov outlines in some of his works in the 40s on how, if we were to create AI, how could we possibly program rules that they don't violate to keep them in line with our values. The problem with these rules is, though, as anyone who's watched any robot movie, the rules can always be reinterpreted, especially rule number 1. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm unless if you so interpret that to mean humans are interpreting other humans, and so I should enslave all of humanity to prevent humans from harming other humans, which is what we see with Vicky in Will Smith's I, Robot. He's technically canceled, but I think it's still a good movie. Still worth watching. So the problem here is, and this gets to a more deep, fundamental philosophical problem, is that you cannot boil down prudence, practical wisdom, and all the intricacies of human interaction into rules. Rules are just not going to be able to do the work. Doesn't matter how complicated the rules are, with all the conjunctions that you could possibly think of, rules are prone to exceptions. And that is an interesting feature of how human behavior works and human beings are in our interactions. I'll talk about that more at the end. Another solution, this is from Stuart Russell. Program AI to satisfy human desires about how we want the future to go. This can't go wrong. Human desires, a lot of our desires are bad. At best, our desires conflict. Are we really the ones who should be in charge with setting the course for humanity? Probably not. But it's an interesting idea, and one that I think offers an opportunity for interesting philosophical reflection. So in the last 10 minutes, I want to hone in on this. 2 problems to the desires approach. 1, human beings have bad desires, goals, and aims. And 2, which I alluded to earlier, practical wisdom cannot be encapsulated by or reduced to rules. Rules are helpful, But wisdom, when to apply certain rules in which cases, is the sort of thing that cannot itself be boiled down to another rule. There's a regress there, right? This is why character is important. This is why wisdom is important. The application of rules to particulars is something that a wise practical agent engages in. And it's the sort of thing that you cannot program into artificial intelligence. So on the first point, Chesterton, one of my favorite authors, on the point of original sin, he says, well, modern masters of science are much impressed with the need of beginning all inquiry with a fact. The ancient masters of religion were quite equally impressed with that necessity, but they began with the fact of sin, a fact as practical as potatoes. But they essentially deny human sin, which they can see in the street. The strongest saints and the strongest skeptics alike took positive evil as the starting point of their argument. And in another piece, he says, the doctrine of original sin is the only empirically verifiable doctrine of the Christian faith. So there's a kind of naivety and an undue optimism about humanity in the way that some of these AI proponents are want to engage in. When we say just like, well, look, we can just program AI to align with our values, like, have you stopped to think about humanity's values? Are we really so confident in our goals, what we desire, what we take to be good, that's not going to be susceptible to abuse or misuse? So I think here's where the Christian story offers something not just interesting, but hugely practical to offer how we think about these existential risks. Look, we are a fallen, broken people. Our desires are broken and fallen. They mismatch at best. And so it's not easy. It's not as easy a solution to just say, well, look, let's just make sure AI aligns with our values, because our values are oftentimes off the mark. The second point, I think this is the deeper point here, that rules can't do all the work that developers think they can do. And that's because practical wisdom, the way human beings engage in the world, the way we hone our practical abilities and skills and characters to deal with the nuances of particular situations, that requires cultivating practical wisdom, which is not just a theoretical enterprise about how to live well. It is a practical set of tendencies and habits that come from the outside in, that come from observing exemplars, that come from going through trials and suffering and having one's will and character forged in the battles of life. Like, that is something that's not reducible to just follow these certain rules to be a good person. Virtues, in the way that they're classically and anciently conceived of, equip their bearers to act in the right way, at the right time, to the right degree, for the right reason, and towards the right end. There's no formula that gives you how to do that well. St. Augustine says that prudence, or practical wisdom, prudence is just the ancient term for it here, is love discerning aright that which helps from that which hinders us in tending to God. So there's a teleological component to human action, that we come from God and we are going towards God. And it's about discerning the rightness, right? That there's like, the virtuous person looks at a situation and sees what is called for and what is not called for, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. But sometimes those cannot be encapsulated just in a mere prohibition or a mere permissibility condition. Aquinas goes even further and says prudence is a habit of the practical rather than the speculative intellect. It's properly called wisdom with respect to human activities. Prudence extends to singulars as well as to universals. So this is taking rules and applying them to particular situations. Practical reasoning involves both general or universal rules and experiential facts, and particular premises that can be applied to particular situations. The prudent person differs from others in assessing just which such universal and particular premises are the appropriate ones to consider and act on in any given situation, right? So prudence is embodied. It's contextual, it takes history, it takes having been cultivated, it takes having witnessed exemplars, and all these other facets that seem to be unique to the way humans live our lives. So lastly, I want to end with just a reflection on human dependence. And this is, I think, where we might be able to think and make progress on what's distinctive about the way humans think and the way AI thinks if it does. All of us in this room were born. We weren't just thrown into existence. We weren't made, We didn't just pop into being. And this is, I think, crucial to our thinking about ourselves, that you are the product of two people coming together in a certain way, at a certain time, in a certain place, and the values and beliefs that you hold now are also shaped by that initial environment and subsequent environments in early development. So there's a radical irreplaceability to the conditions around your coming into being. That's not true of an iPhone. An iPhone, you can make it in China, and now Apple wants to move their plants to India because it's cheaper there, and you get the same outputs. You can get an iPhone, doesn't matter where you make it, as long as you have the same raw materials. That is not true with human beings. There's a radical particularity and dependence of you on your parents, your early environment. You are irreplaceable in that way. And your knowledge, your beliefs, is also contingent on the environments that formed you. We talk about formation and development. Human beings are the sorts of things that develop, or don't just pop into existence pre-made or pre-wired with certain views or beliefs. So our knowledge is highly dependent. None of you has, you can't imagine views that you hold that don't in some way trace themselves back to some form of testimony. Someone said something at some point, and now you have a belief. Whether that's a belief in the resurrection, whether that's a belief in the reliability of the law of gravity and holds across lots of different conditions, our beliefs are radically contingent on other people in this way. And I think that that kind of feature of human dependence is it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's something that's good about the way that we think and are. And lastly, thinking is a practical skill. It's not just abstract. It's not just speculative. That involves coordinating dozens of fine motor skills against a backdrop of inherited assumptions. So that sounds kind of abstract, and I don't want to spend too much time about it, but our bodies are integral to how we think. So if I were to tell Dr. Lett, for example, can you go to the room next door and grab me an eraser for the board? To do that requires lots of fine motor skills in executing the function of locomotion, moving from one place to another, of seeing the room and paying attention to the relevant features. This is a door. This is a wall. That's a person there. There's a prudential judgment of if he walks into the room and sees a meeting taking place to know, okay, well, maybe the eraser's not worth it, and then jump back out, right? Those sorts of things that's just human interactions have all of these assumptions and skills baked into all the mundane things that we do all the time. Now could you program an AI to do that sort of stuff? All those backdrop assumptions, all that goes on in our really complex perceptual faculties, all that goes on in the prudential judgments of should I go in here, should I not? Well, this would be bad if I did, and the eraser's not that important. All these things that we do, we don't even think about how complicated those activities are and how our thinking is inextricably linked to our bodies. An AI doesn't have a body in a sense, right? It might have a physical substrate, but it's not a body. So, we are essentially embodied, so rationality depends on our embodied features. We should not look for human uniqueness in the grandeur of our intellect, but in our embodiment, our dependence on one another, and our capacity for friendship with God. The Harvard anthropologist Joseph Heinrich wrote a book called The Secret to Our Success, where he says, it's not human intellect that explains why we're the one species that's taken over the globe, why we're thrown all over the place, we've built civilizations, we've got lasers, we put out Justin Bieber, but that's a bug, not a feature. It's not those really complicated things about what we are, it's our dependence on one another. It's that we can cooperate, that our information that we pass on from generation to generation is really contextual and dependent on our having inherited it from previous generations. So there's an intergenerationality, there's a dependence within a group. And so dependence seems to be an under-recognized, underappreciated virtue of human existence. And as Christians, we can talk about dependence on God as also being a unique capacity and also something that's a feature, not a bug. We should avoid the temptation to master nature, and this comes up a lot in the AI debates. What can we do to the world? And I think there's a healthy word of caution to think about technology and pursue technology in ways that can promote human flourishing. But where there's a clear path to human flourishing, maybe we should take a step back and at least stop and think about what it is that we're doing and not let our innovation outpace our reflection. God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. I think this is a really interesting parallel that we see in AI. The stuff that's difficult for AI is the stuff that's easy for a child to do. And so it's not the grandness of calculation and processing that is distinctive about humanity. That's not the stuff that we should be enamored by and be taken by. But it's the laughter of a child, the ability to find something funny. That's what's distinctive about humanity. Thinking is a practical skill for us. It's not merely abstract. Our bodies are assumed before we even start thinking, the dependence of our thinking on our natality. And lastly, this idea that prudence is essentially practical and can't be reduced to rules. I want to leave you all with a challenge. And I'm just going to read a little portion from the ending of the Canticle for Leibowitz. The closer men came to perfecting for themselves a paradise, the more impatient they seemed to become with it, and with themselves as well. They made a garden of pleasure and became progressively more miserable with it as it grew in richness and power and beauty. For then perhaps it was easier for them to see that something was missing in the garden, some tree or shrub that would not grow. When the world was in darkness and wretchedness, it could believe in perfection and yearn for it. But when the world became bright with reason and riches, it began to sense the narrowness of the needle's eye. And that rankled for a world no longer willing to believe or yearn. Well, they were going to destroy it again, were they? This garden, this earth, civilized and knowing, to be torn apart again, that man might hope again in wretched darkness. And sometimes non-ideal conditions gives us the ability to reflect on and appreciate what's distinctive about our humanity and our human relationships. And so I just invite you to think about, where should we draw the line? The Amish famously drew the line at electricity and, more importantly, cars, because they thought, well, this is going to really undermine our communities and our friendships and relationships, and it did. We have to think about how technology impacts and influences our interactions and the ways that we decide to be human, and no technology is innocuous. So I'm not saying let's not, but let's think and let's ask ourselves, if not here, but where would we draw the line? So, human nature is unique, but often not in the ways we think it is. Here's some further reading, and thank you for your time.